Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to talk about the first 15 episodes of Power Rangers Dino Charge. So ultimately, I had seen the pilot episode of Power Rangers Dino Charge. I'm like, you know what? I actually like the villain story of this. Like, I liked the villain idea of this season. And so ultimately, I'm just like, you know what? How about I just, because I've kind of gone into so many Power Rangers seasons at this point. I ultimately was just like, hey, let's just kind of give this a try and ultimately see if this is an actually decent season or not. So let's get into the positives about this. One, the villain story is something that I actually really do enjoy. Because ultimately it doesn't really seem like there's any annoying villains. It seems that if anything, there is really an enjoyable thing going on whenever the villain stories are going on. Nothing seems heavily recycled, and so ultimately you're just kind of like, okay, like the villain story's nice. Going into this, there are some very interesting visuals. Even excuse me, even though it kind of feels like this season, as far as design wise goes, honestly, kind of, even though it probably wasn't, this design kind of feels like on the cheap end of things. But when looking at this season compared to look at Lost Galaxies or Time Forces or whatever other seasons, that some of the helmets or some of the outfits for the Power Rangers could have felt phoned in at any number of time or whatever. So, because ultimately just pushing out another season of this and this and that and there and that, whatever, what have you. So, going into this, some interesting visuals, some interesting things going on with the visual aspects of this now. And so, bravo to that. I think there are some monsters that I actually did enjoy within these episodes, within 15 episodes. And so, I guess bravo to that. I could find something watchable within 15 episodes. But now, here is the opposite end of the sword. So, and oh wait. I liked the Morphers. I think the Morphers, the whole pistol thing where you basically have a blaster that is having these people morph. I thought that was kind of cool and creative. I think it was kind of interesting that they had to spin the blaster to ultimately do things. I thought that was kind of cool. So the morphing kind of thing kind of was interesting to me, even though it's just reasonably a thing for somebody to merchandise and sell and whatever to you, which I'm sure is probably really expensive because it's an entire weapon to be sold as a so I'm sure it's probably a high end thing. Anyways, plus you have a bunch of accessories to that thing and this and that and whatever, what have you. Plus you have the little tiny little gem magic thing that ultimately is going to morph these people. And I thought that, I'm like, okay, nothing should be that small to have a person morph into. Man, it was hilarious watching them basically going into its morphing time because, man, with the camera really desperately need to zoom in to these things for them to be shown on camera, and it was just the crazy camera moves of every single time someone would say it's morphing time and the camera would rush in to get as close as humanly possible for them to morph, so ultimately people could see things and then eventually like go into the normal copy and paste additional thing of them actually morphing. So going into this also, here's where we are starting to going to get into the negatives. So within these 15 episodes, there's a lot of throwaway like episodes. There really is. Because I think there's a lot of times where it hypen or it goes into the development of one said character. Like we're getting additional characters to the roster by every episode, and I'm ultimately like, yeah, you know what? If I don't like this one individual Esh-like character, I'm not going to like this episode. And I think that that's stupid. Like, I don't think that you should have a team building like maneuver when it comes to Power Rangers, because when looking at it, you can have the entire team and then eventually have individual episodes. Like, have the entire team already there and then build up to individual episodes. Like, don't do the reverse where you're going to build up these certain characters and then go into a team thing. That does not work. Because what ends up happening is you get 15 episodes of team building. And I'm like, you know what? I don't really like this. If anything, you have, of course, you have dinosaurs in this season with them being the Rangers. But when looking at it, it seems like you're really just kind of cycling off any dinosaur at this point, even if it's not a dinosaur that is easy to mention, say, or whatever. It's just like, no, we're just gonna go with whatever's left. Like we'll go with, of course, Tyrannosaurus Rex because we forcibly have to. There are certain dinosaurs which they forcibly had to go back into and recycle into, and I was just like, yeah, that kind of feels really easy. And ultimately, they got into a Raptor Zord, which I'm like, oh crap. So if you have a Raptor Ranger, I'm like, well, like I had an idea to do a Power Ranger series that ties into a Raptor, but I guess that's gone because you already have a Raptor Ranger technically in Dino Charge, because I didn't watch every single Power Ranger season, but now that I have, it's like, well, Raptor is out because it's been done before, but then again, so has a T-Rex, so has been a Tyrannosaurus Rex, that like, man, Power Rangers and your recycling, just like, I get it that it's been a while, like it's been a couple years since doing a dinosaur like show, but still, like I guess every couple years you just have to rehash another dinosaur like themed Power Ranger show because you'll get a new generation of fans. But like, you've now had Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, you've had Dino Thunder, and then now you have Dino Charge. There's probably any other dinosaurs like seasons out there, then let me know in the comments below. More than likely, I probably missed one or another, but because there's probably been plenty of them at this point. Anyways, going into this, yeah, there's a lot of garbagey like episodes. There's a lot of garbagey like concepts, and like there is some interesting story at some points going on in here, but it's kind of muddled with a lot of garbage. It really is, to be brutally honest. Like with like there's a juncture of like tossing in some like royalty like story, like some prince like story, and I didn't care for that at all. Like I didn't care for that at all. I think that was dumb. I was just like, I don't care for this, and they kept pushing it in there and pushing it in there, and I'm like, I don't really care for that. Um, there are some interesting additions. There are some interesting additions that continue to happen. That ultimately, like, there was some things that won me over, but there was some goofy things going on as well. There was a lot of story that I honestly and truly did not care about. If anything, there is honestly one Power Rangers character. If going into Power Rangers Samurai, I ultimately admittedly would say, yeah, I'm not a fan of the Gold Ranger of that show. Ultimately, within this season, I am not a fan of Coda in this episode or in this season. I am not a fan of this man at all. No offense to the actor, it's just I don't like the way that this person is done. And some people may agree with me. Some people might think that it's a fun gimmick, and ultimately it might be like a thing that people would just be fine with because it just puts something different to this show. But I'm not gonna go that route. I'm just gonna go with like, man, this seems like a really clunky way to just go into doing a show. To have this person that consistently talks a certain way, but is just this gimmicky character for this certain season. I was just like, I was kind of turned off by that. But I don't know. I guess they were trying to just do something different, but when looking at it, it's not a good different. It's not a good different to me. But there are some interesting character building episodes, and ultimately, yeah, like, but I don't care for the individual episodes going on into this season, and there's a lot of them. I think there's too much of them. Because you have 6 Rangers, and they have to have all of their individual episodes, and I just don't care for that. Just don't care for it at all. Um, we have to have everyone get their gems and have an entire episode dedicated to them getting their gems, and then eventually suiting up and eventually taking down everybody, and huzzah for them. That's great and all, but when it comes down to it, it just doesn't clearly come down as a thumbs up in my book. It just doesn't. If anything, I do share a last name with one of the characters in this show. Evidently, we have the Green Ranger as Riley Griffin, so we share in character terms the same last name. But ultimately, like any number of these people, like I don't really like any number of them. Sadly enough, or yeah, I think Riley. I think Riley is the green one, right? Now I have to backpedal because I'm like, am I getting that wrong? Ultimate, yeah, that's the problem. With the exception of probably the Red Ranger, every single one of these characters are so overwhelmingly bland that, like, basically, like, you would need to slap an accent on these people or have them have such a big, huge personality like trait that'll make them different to me, because every single one of these people all is like a boatload of like every single one of the characters are all bland, and that is not the actor's fault. That is just the Power Ranger way of things. Like every single character is interchangeable, and that is always the biggest problem. That basically every single one of these characters you can't solely invest in unless they actually want to put the time to give you reasons to invest in these characters, because that is the biggest problem. A lot of the problems that I have is every single character for a lot of the Power Ranger shows are bland as F, and it's always going to be that way No difference to this. So again, I don't blame the actors. I just blame the Power Rangers way of doing things, because it's repetition. Like, it's gonna have to get to a point where I just have to accept that, and I'm willing to not like, because I know there's good Power Ranger seasons out there. Like, I know there are good things if ultimately people want to put out good things. Ultimately, Power Rangers Samurai was a good enough season for me, and knowing that, like, well, yeah, but what happened to all of this other stuff that came before it? Or if anything, there was a pretty good, decent build up of some pretty decent Power Rangers seasons, yada yada yada. And why is it that all of a sudden this just got off track at some point to just be bland as F? Anyways, but like, again, let's go into spoilers, because I've already been going into 16 minutes of talk about this in a very cryptic like sense. So let's kind of just push into spoilers about this show, because every one of these characters are bland. No, again, it's not the actor's fault. It's the Power Rangers' way of doing things. Everyone doesn't have a personality. Every one of them are blank as F, and it's not the problem. It's just, hey guys, do you want to write a good season? No, we just want to push another product out. Okay, all right, thumbs up. Gosh darn it, flarn it, I tell you. I would, and I know, like, TV to write every single week is a very difficult thing, especially for Power Rangers, because it feels like everything has been done at some point. Basically, like, either that, or it's like, if the wheel isn't broke, don't fix it. But because everybody is just kind of like on autopilot, because they've been doing this for so long, and they think that, like, we need to stay in a formation kind of like way, and we're not going to change that formation and go rogue or go anarchy, or try to reinvent any wheels. No, because this has just been so successful for such a long time, regardless of us really pushing out great product. It's just like, it still continues to, the wheels continue to turn. So, and we're still earning money, so we just got to keep the lights on, basically, at this point, because everything else is still thumbs up success. So we're not going to send a rogue person in here to drastically reinvent any wheels, or try to, like, drastically change the Power Rangers way of things. And so, more than likely, maybe I probably won't be easily accepted as a Power Rangers like writer at some point. But it is what it is. So again, nothing to do with any of the actors. They read a script, they like, if anything, like, they ultimately have to shake hands and kiss babies to continue to be working on this script, or continue to work on this show, because otherwise, justifiably, like, Saban will make somebody go to a peace conference, or Saban will ultimately have somebody be replaced by some other Power Ranger, because this Power Ranger wasn't working out, or like, Saban could get rid of you like this if you're not working out. So, like, if you're not going to shake hands and kiss babies when you're going into a Power Rangers like show, like, yeah, or Power Rangers anything, like, basically, yeah, you're like you're really going to have to, like, rub people the right way. So that's what all these people forcibly had to do to continue to do this show. So, going into this, like, yeah, I really didn't like the helmets of the show. Like, it feels like the visuals of the Power Rangers in this season kind of felt like RPM-ish, where it kind of feels kind of childlike. It didn't look like overly detailed. It looked fairly simplistic. And when looking at it, I was like, like when looking at it, there's been a couple other Dino series that I could be much warmer to visually. And now this one just kind of like really tries to put some visually odd things out there because this has been done numerous times over. So yeah, very odd like approach, but anyways, just Power Rangers phoning it in, sadly enough. But anyways, but that's also a very interesting thing about Power Rangers is eventually they will finally give you a really solid season, especially if something at some point like, man, we're losing ratings, like let's get something good out there. But then like I don't know, it's really hard to write a Power Ranger show. I will tip to the hat of the writers for that ultimately like everything has probably been done for Power Rangers, and ultimately like for you to try to do anything different, somebody's going to tell you, well, that's not the Power Ranger way. And then you're like, oh, come on. Like, I just want to do something different in this show. I just want to have a story be important, but instead, you're giving, like, some goofy story out there. Anyways, let's go into these episodes. So, I think probably my favorite villains were probably also goofy villains. I honestly liked the episode where you have the Cavity villain, the villain called Cavity. The episode called "The Tooth Hurts." That's how well I really liked this villain. I remember the episode because how could you not? Basically, this is a character this is a monster that bitters up her sweets to ultimately make people's teeth hurt, which I thought was kind of a very fun and interesting concept. I overwhelmingly liked the episode, and like I thought, yeah, there were some goofy things going on here, but I liked the visual. I thought the visual was fun. I thought overall the just like the approach of this whole thing was just kind of really fun in this episode. And so bravo to the people that gave me at least a solidly good episode that I just liked. You have one ranger who eventually is fallen to um, having his teeth hurt ridiculously to where every time he talks, he's like grabbing his mouth and he's like, ah! And yeah, so because ultimately you have it to where the Rangers are ultimately having their teeth hurt every single time that they talk, because ultimately in the beginning of this episode you have this monster that is feeding pies to people that ultimately is making their teeth hurt, and so Sledge ultimately is like, yeah, like you need to do this to the Power Rangers. You need to make them like in agony. So we have Sledge, who ultimately is a very like man, like we have never seen a really good villain like this since probably Lord Zed. And I say that knowing full well that there's probably other really good villains probably out there that any probably number of people will say that it's like, oh no, this is the better villain. What about the Power Ranger Zeo villain? What about Andromeda? What about the Turbo villain? I guess. What about any number of like other assortment of characters? And what about any of these people? No, I think that I like so and so villain much better. I don't know. When looking at it, there's a lot of irrelevant villains because they are just not important enough. The more important story is the Power Rangers, because ultimately it's most of the time you have a really good Power Ranger story, and who cares about the villains? They're just there to get defeated and then just cry about it to their mother or whoever person is there. So Sledge, really good. I really like this character overall. He's very much like when he walks into a room, like, and he looks menacing, you buy it. You buy that people are going to cower in fear about this man because this guy is freaking huge. So you can buy that he's a threat. You can buy, even though, like, at some points you could also look at his costume and tell that it quasi looks cheaply made at some points, but like you can just kind of like forget about all that and just kind of like keep into the whole like character mode, because I started to see some little tweaks of costume of this thing of Sledge, and I was like, yeah, there's something about that looks a little cheap, Sledge. But just whatever. It's how many Power Ranger seasons have they done at this point? Doesn't matter. Everything has to look cheap at some point just to cut costs because of how many freaking shows have they done. Basically, for this one, it's just like basically like, hey man, we want a really cool helmet, and then basically everything else just phone it all in. And like basically, that's the way that Power Rangers has kind of done and everything for I don't know how long. It's like, hey man, like put a really cool helmet on this guy and then just have like 5 different costumes that all look the same. Like just slap a different color on all of them, but all the costumes all look the freaking same, and that's what they are. So, anyways, so we have Sledge, we have Wrench, which is kind of a very interesting, like, kind of Finster-esque like person, which isn't really what his job is because every single villain just comes from a underground like jail cell because this guy is a bounty hunter that had uh, collected all of these monsters. So eventually, it's just shoving them all out there to eventually get defeated by the Power Rangers. And we have uh, Poisandra or Poisandra Poisandra. I'm gonna mispronounce that, but I'm trying numerous times to pronounce it. The girl that has a boatload of pink going on. Kind of an interesting, like, for real anime people, like, this costume was actually like, man, what a lot of time was put into this. Like, what a lot of effort. And then also you get, like, Fury, which, again, like, a lot of effort put into this guy. But he comes down to be very much more of a Goldar-esque like character. And weirdly enough, like, Fury has people inside of him that eventually, once Fury is fighting people, eventually like these things start to spill out, which I thought was kind of interesting and fun. To ultimately see that kind of different of a concept where if you beat Fury good enough, he will spill out some kind of person that he had kept locked away within him for a very long time. And I thought that that was a really good uh, execution. It was kind of interesting for Tyler, the Red Ranger, to ultimately have some desperation to hope that Fury has his father within him and hoping that eventually, like if they were to fight Fury, that that would spill out his father. But ultimately, what ends up happening instead is it ends up spilling out a knight from a much earlier time, which was uh, Sir Ivan. Sir Ivan, that ultimately ends up being our Gold Ranger of this season. Which ultimately this Gold Ranger was a knight in shining armor esque like character, and ultimately, like, a lot of people could say that the whole knight thing has been done a lot or has been just frequently done or whatever. I don't know. I think every time that this comes up, I am immediately like having like thumbs up moments about this, about the visuals of this. Every single time we have like a knighted like Gold Ranger or just knighted quasi ballparkingly sixth ranger, I am thumbs up a lot of the times. The only thing is, when we actually get Sir Ivan and he talks, now we have to forcibly have this guy through this entire season have a accent, and I don't know if I'm really liking the accent or not. Like, you would have thought that eventually he would have just, like, at first, like, had the accent, but then eventually at some point maybe like Coda, where Coda like barely can speak, but then you would have thought eventually they would have just transitioned these two characters to drop the accent and also drop the whole like language speech impediment like thing and make these normal rangers instead of making them gimmick rangers, which I did not like. There was a funny moment where you do have Sir Ivan who eventually grabs a bunch of random people that do random things from off the street to have them be his Power Ranger helpers. And so recently he just grabs like a sword swallower and a traffic uh, a traffic person and like an old lady and a bunch of other people, and has him fight against these monster villains. But then eventually they realize, oh my god, we're fighting monsters, and so they crazily run away. And you just have the Gold Ranger that is looking back and he's like, what? Like, come on, this is what we were gonna do. And so ultimately he ends up on his own, like trying to fight off these monsters. And I thought that that was kind of funny. I thought that that whole approach was kind of a funny thing, because ultimately, like the Gold Ranger could not trust the actual Rangers, and I thought that that was just kind of fun. I think there was fun about that. Um, I also liked the episode where you have the villain called Bones, where ultimately this is a character that takes out certain bone parts of people's bodies, but it's not like literally like he's taking out a like it's not like he's taking off like a a kneecap or something and then you can't walk. Like basically it's like metaphorical bones that basically like he's taking out your backbone, and so ultimately you're a coward. Like I thought that that was kind of an interesting episode. I liked it. Like I thought that that was really fun. Um Overall, like some interesting episodes here, but there also is some stupid episodes. Like I thought the whole thing about the Prince thing, and they eventually came back around to go into the whole Prince being a Power Ranger, to me was just like, I'm like, I don't care for this. I don't care for this. Like you have like a Power Ranger that is royalty, like no, like I have no qualms about like cultural like things. I don't know. I just didn't really care for the aspect of these stories, like the whole like tying into royalty and stuff like that. Um, like you are basically saying now that basically like they've ran out of stories to do, that ultimately they're just going to tie in like royalty stories because it sounds different. But to me, it just sounds like you're just like, whatever, we'll just put whatever out there. Like I'm not saying make a episode that is personal to my country. No, I don't care about that. It's just like I didn't care for like quite a bit of these episodes because it just felt that like there was some disconnect there. Like obviously there was some people that were prominently saying like, yeah, like yeah, this show was shot in New Zealand. I'm basically telling you all now that we have a Power Ranger show shot in New Zealand, and we're basically prominently mentioning that because it's easier to just go with that way now. Um, and so reasonably, I think that was a disconnect. It's like, dude, like, you don't have to like tell me what setting this place is now, like as if you're completely giving up on just giving us some kind of location, um, with a random like address, or just giving us a like Angel Grove Esh like place. And now you've just given up on that and just said, "Oh yeah, we shoot New Zealand. F you. I'm not even gonna try to just like justify this now." It's like, hey, we're in New Zealand. Whatever. Like, like really? Like, just give me a setting. Like, that's all I ask. Anyways, or make the place vague. Make it be a place you don't know where it is. Again, I'm not saying that you have to personalize everything for certain countries or whatever. Just to me, there were some stories where I just didn't care about because it felt like, does everybody really like does everybody really like these certain kind of episodes, like no matter where you are in the world? But if anything, there might be some people that are diehard Power Rangers fans that love everything regardless, or just are happy or content about a lot of things. And ultimately, there's some people that might like some garbage seasons. And so ultimately, there's some diehard people out there that love the worst seasons out there because maybe they just find it fun. I'm not saying that this is a really awful season. There could be worse things out there. Ultimately, there's not one episode on here that I thought was just like a episode I couldn't come back from. And I felt like there were some episodes on certain seasons where I'm like, God, this episode was the worst episode I've ever seen. There was not one episode in here that I thought that. But then again, I didn't feel like any number of these episodes were relevant enough. Like there was one episode where we have the Pink Ranger, Shelby, who, like, to me, like, here's one Pink Ranger that ultimately I did not like. I didn't care for the Pink Ranger. It has nothing to do with like this actress. I just didn't like this Pink Ranger. Normally I would like the women. I would like the women rangers. Like ultimately some of them would have like personalities or certain traits that kind of would be a little bit of annoying. But like this time around, I looked at this Pink Ranger. I'm like, any story that is going to dip into you and you're going to be the focal point at any point in time, I'm not going to like anything that's going to be brought into her being a thing in this show. And yeah, like there was the whole thing about her desperately wanting to enjoy this certain band. And so we have an entire episode focal pointed on this person desperately wanting to get tickets to see this band. As well as there's actually a really good villain in this episode. Like this villain has these ruin like tiles that crush the Power Rangers to the ground. And I thought that that was a really interesting episode. I hated the fact that Chase had to he had to get this power to ultimately incorporate it in this same exact episode. I thought that was garbage. Like, so you're basically foreshadowing that this power is going to be used in this episode, and I'm just like, wow, really? Because basically, you tell us that the power is to break through concrete And when you know it, bottled within this episode, Chase has to go through mountains and mountains of concrete because ultimately this guy is slapping down these big fat concrete things of ruins that Chase is going to break into. And I did not like that at all. I thought that was stupid because I'm like, you know what? You could just have this power just randomly added into this episode, and then maybe the episode later, like, it has a use. Doesn't have to be today. It doesn't have to be in this episode. You know what? With, like, it would just be fun for them to just randomly build in stuff that at some point they will probably use later. Maybe a couple of episodes later, but not within the very same episode. My good God, you would think with how basically they have to do like 40 to 60 some odd episodes of any season, you would think what they would do is they would just have gadget sections in their episodes where it's like, hey, look, like we're just creating this random gadget for a week and it has nothing to do with this episode. But then eventually, somewhere down the line, they are going to remember that that gadget exists. And then eventually, they are going to build in this gadget later on in the episode to finally resolve why they had gotten said random gadget for legitimate reasons. Yeah, like have there being a having there being a good reason why you should watch every single episode of Power Rangers and not have every single thing bottled within itself. That's what I hate about these shows, and that's what I hate about Power Rangers. It's like bottleneck everything, make it so everything is just like resolved within the episode, and reasonably no episode means any look of anything to keep watching because you can just drop into any episode and there is no building of anything. There's no building of any except for the conclusion of getting more Rangers per every episode. I guess that's a real building thing going on in this season, but I don't care about the building. I just don't. The characters aren't good enough to build to, and the story isn't good enough to ultimately probably talk about any number of the rest of these episodes. Um, yeah. Coming off, like I would like to find tons and tons of Power Ranger seasons that would overwhelmingly just be like, yeah, like it's great that I love this now, and I love so many about them. But with how many episodes is there now from like Mighty Morphin all the way to like how many like themed episodes are we going into now? Like overall, there's probably what like maybe 20 some odd seasons. How is it that probably out of 20 some odd seasons, and I mean like themed, like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is all one thing. Alien Rangers, one thing. Zeo, one thing. So on, so forth. It's not like the Tommy era or whatever. No. Like through Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, through all of this stuff, we're probably thinking about probably somewhere in the lines of maybe quite possibly 20 some odd seasons. If you give or take, probably the Super Samurai and Samurai are all one thing. Ninja, Super Ninja Steel, all one thing, and so on, so forth, whatever, what have you. So let's say 15 some odd seasons. Probably out of 15 some odd seasons, there is probably maybe 5 seasons that are actually good. 5 things that are actually good out of everything, and like this one is one of them. It isn't. So I don't know if I'm going to go into this any further. It probably might also kind of feel like I didn't watch every single episode, but I just like it's just there's building, there's Power Rangers building, and I don't like those. I don't like them. I don't even like when we have like a ranger that has to be found to accumulate into the five rangers. Every single time they have a sixth ranger episode, that is a good episode because ultimately you have a sixth ranger that just cleans house and beats everybody, and I think that that is just kind of a fun episode. But like when you have to build up, like, okay, we have to showcase how the pink ranger is going to get her power and the red ranger is going to get her power, or get his power, and then eventually we have to showcase how the black range or the green ranger is going to get his power, because that's how it basically goes into this. Is we have like convenient people that all bump into one another, and like are all just like, well, I guess we're all going to be Power Rangers now. Hey, yeah, luckily all this is working out for us to just team together bizarrely. Because in this show specifically, it's weird that all of a sudden, like, you would think that they would all just go their separate ways and realize that, you know what, I'm just gonna fight these things, like, without anybody. Like, I think the Gold Ranger tries to do that, but then he realizes that he's like, well, how about I just team with these people anyways? Because they're here, I'm here, so I'm just gonna keep being with these people until this season is over. So, and ultimately we have the prince who ultimately comes in here, and then he's a silver Power Ranger with a weird, bizarrish man, cosmetically this guy's helmet is goofy looking. As far as like Zord, him, everything goofy looking. Zords, the Zords, just the Zords. Yeah, just meh, just doesn't twiddle my fiddle, if you know what I mean. But at the end of the day, yeah, we get pink, red, green, black, and then I think gold. Then we have silver after that, silver and gold. So, like, recently, it's kind of interesting that we don't go into the same road about a hoe as per usual shows, where we have to like have the exact same colors every single season. So I think that that's nice. We don't have to have the traditional colors every single time, with the Green Ranger is the Sixth Ranger kind of thing, and this and that. We can kind of switch over to just go, okay, how about we just have silver and gold, and maybe every once in a while we'll get a random color in there. Every once in a while, like a purple or a orange, but most of the time it's just okay. That's probably gonna be like the Sixth Ranger most of the time. But anyways, I think that's all I'll have to say about this season. So far, if ultimately people by and large just overwhelmingly watch this review, then I will probably go through and watch more Dino Charge. But I don't know. I think this is probably more than likely I'm going into much more Mighty Morphin Power Ranger episodes, because that show was actually really fun, and it's just kind of a reflection back on a show that was, no matter what, was still a good show, to me ultimately. So we're gonna keep going into Mighty Morphin episodes, and then eventually we're probably gonna get at some point some other things here and there that are Power Ranger related, or even stuff like Power Rangers, because ultimately I'm gonna probably review some other kind of random like movies that feel like Power Rangers at some point. But I'm going to get out of here because I have other things to do. So goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.